When a ride has an accident, the task or even thought of reopening it can be very challenging. If a ride is to reopen after an accident, a serious amount of modifications is required in order to ensure that the ride is safe to operate. This is even the case when nothing mechanical has gone wrong with the ride. This was the situation for Glenwood Caverns with the Haunted Mine Drop. This ride was an indoor underground drop tower that started at the top of a 110-foot shaft. Riders were loaded at the top of the ride, then a retractable floor would open. The ride unit would detach from the catch car and fall to the bottom of the shaft. It would then decelerate using fixed eddy current magnetic brakes. The catch car would then retrieve the ride vehicle from the bottom of the shaft. The ride featured a pair of non-retractable seatbelts as its only restraint. The circumstances of the accident were the result of multiple problems spanning from design to training and human factors. If you're not familiar with the accident, I recommend watching my video on it first, as much of that information is referenced in this video. Glenwood Caverns would at first consider closing the ride forever, before eventually deciding to keep the ride, but with some major changes. The design of the ride had some challenges that were unique to it, such as the underground nature that made it hard to call on precedent for a redesign. Accordingly, the park reached out to Apollo Engineering, a firm with experience modifying amusement rides, to complete the project. Apollo would take on the task along with a separate electrical contractor who would handle the ride's control system. The team started by tearing out many parts of the Haunted Mine Drop. This included the removal of nearly all of the theming elements, the original control system, and even the lift motor for the catch car, as the current motor would not be powerful enough for the planned modifications. They then set to work modifying the ride itself. It was unclear if a failure analysis by the ride's original manufacturer had ever been performed, despite being required by ASTM standards. Accordingly, Apollo performed their own and came up with a number of changes to enhance the safety of the ride. We will refer to these problems with the original ride as pathogens. The changes would focus on 3 procedures to remove design and procedural pathogens found on the original ride. The first was to design out pathogens, in effect, removing their existence if possible. This is the highest and most ideal way to remove these problems. Such changes modify the design of the ride itself and make it impossible for the same problems present on the original to occur. One example was the seatbelts of the original ride. The original design featured long, dark-colored, non-retractable seatbelts, the tails of which could be placed over a rider's lap and give them an appearance of wearing a seatbelt. To design this out, Apollo added a single brightly colored locking seatbelt that was retractable. In addition, the new seatbelt uses a 3-point design that makes it even clearer if it's not being properly worn. The next best form of modification is to guard. These are simpler modifications that make error or catastrophic error more difficult. One example of this is the change to a brightly colored seatbelt, as it makes it obvious if a rider is not sitting on it, though it doesn't completely exclude the possibility of a rider sitting on top of it. Another example is the addition of a cage around the rider vehicle. This now means that if a ride is started without a rider secured, they would not fall to the bottom of the shaft. The final solution to pathogens is to warn. This can include training and warning signs. Most changes in this area were completed by Glenwood Caverns themselves, who would make large changes to their training program to ensure that ride operators had a clear understanding of what possibilities for error were present at the rides at the park, and what the consequences of such an error could be. Going through the specific changes, the layout of the building the ride was housed in was changed. The control booth was relocated to have a direct view of the ride unit rather than relying on video monitors and an indirect view of the ride. The ride's queue was changed to allow space for riders to view the ride itself, allowing riders to self-screen if the ride was too intense for them. A viewing room for non-riders was also added in the location of the former projector room. This redesign allowed for a dedicated space for riders to be grouped prior to boarding. This was matched with seat number stickers above each seat, something the original ride was missing and caused confusion. The change to the pre-grouping method also meant that the modified ride now requires 2 operators instead of 1. One operator to work the controls and check half of the seats, and the other operator to screen riders, use the newly added dispatch enable panel located near the queue line, and check the other half of the seats. This design change not only enhanced safety by ensuring that two operators were viewing the ride and checking each other's work, it also increased efficiency by allowing riders to secure their loose articles before entering the ride area and giving them assigned seats. To facilitate viewing of the ride unit from these new positions, the solid doors from the mine drop were replaced with a cage-like door that led into the ride area, as well as a second door on the ride unit itself. The doors are locked and interlocked with the ride's control system, meaning that the ride will not start unless they are all properly closed and secured. This allows riders and operators to view the ride unit when it's in the station, while keeping them safely away from the fall hazard presented by the open shaft. As we've already touched on, several changes were made to the restraints themselves. In Glenwood's own testing, a rider sitting on top of a brightly colored seatbelt could still easily appear as if the rider was wearing the seatbelt. Accordingly, they opted for retractable 3-point seatbelts. Additionally, the second, non-locking seatbelt found on the original ride was removed entirely, as there was no need for it for the ride to be compliant, and it added more confusion to loading riders. The new seatbelts were outfitted with a yellow pull strap that operators are required to tug on to confirm that the seatbelt is secure. This had the added benefit of ensuring that the seatbelt is over a rider's lap properly, as otherwise this strap would not be accessible. The old ride featured locking seatbelts that would unlock for 30 seconds at the end of a ride cycle. They would then relock regardless of if the seatbelt had been removed from the receiver. The new ride now features seatbelts that all unlock at the end of a ride cycle and do not relock until all seatbelts have been removed from their receiver. Although interestingly, due to design constraints, they do automatically relock after about 2 minutes, but that is simply due to an actual mechanical concern with the seatbelt locking device itself. Regardless, there is now ample time for riders and ride operators to remove all seatbelts from their receivers prior to this relock occurring. The ride control panel was simplified, having its HMI screen go from being filled with red and green lights that all look the same but could indicate many different things, to a much more intentional design, with less clutter and clearer indications about what the control system was trying to tell the operator. Outside of these changes, Glenwood changed their training procedure to include impact training, highlighting the past incident on the ride to help operators understand the gravity of their jobs, actually showing my original video on the accident to their trainees. Additionally, they wrote a new SOP for the ride from scratch that features extensive detail about the ride and its restraint system, as well as ways these systems could be accidentally misused. Finally, they introduced several new systems to allow for better access of this information and to keep track of operator performance. The first was the introduction of Command Center, a digital documentation and training software for operators at amusement parks. This allows operators to have easy access to the SOP for the ride and for training information to be displayed digitally, with videos as opposed to walls of text. The park also began using IRT, a third-party ride operator auditing firm, to regularly audit their operators to ensure they are performing their job duties in accordance with the new SOP. Of course, beyond the technical changes, the ride also needed a new theme to distance itself from the mine drop. The theme of the Crystal Tower was chosen to be a mystical adventure into a cave full of crystals. This was achieved through the repainting of the building to a new purple and blue color scheme, along with the addition of several specific theme pieces. This includes several light-up crystals located at the bottom of the shaft, along with an audio system telling the story of entering the cave. All of these changes combined have created an attraction that is clearly very different than the mine drop. So far, this has resulted in a very positive response for the park, and the ride continues to be popular, and, of course, operates extremely safely today. Have you had a chance to ride Crystal Tower or the original Haunted Mine Drop? What are your thoughts on the ride? As always, thanks for watching this video, and we will see you next time.